Hey Untold Radio Network fans, want exclusive perks and to support our channel? Introducing our YouTube membership program with 3 amazing levels. Get loyalty badges that level up to different cryptids the longer you're a supporter. How cool is that? You'll also get access to custom Bigfoot emojis and priority in chat. Upgrade to Backstage Pass for exclusive wallpapers, photos, status updates, discounted books, and merchandise. Go all in with the producer level for everything mentioned plus member shoutouts. Ready for an enhanced experience? Join now, pick your membership level, and let's make this journey even more exciting together.
The paranormal, UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your host, Dr. Dean Bertram.
Good evening to all my fellow weirdos and weirdettes out there. Thank you for joining me for Talking Weird on the Untold Radio Network. I'm your host, Dean Bertram, and tonight I have a return guest. He was so fantastic the first time around, and we only got to talk about some of his magnificent book, which he released recently. So we're going to touch on some more of that as well before we get into his even newer book, but that will be right towards the end of the show. So you should hang around for that. He's an avid student of the paranormal, and his eclectic background includes aspects of psychology, addictions, and rock journalism. He has a master's degree in communications from Bloomsburg University and a bachelor's degree in psychology from Aquinas College. He has been interviewed on numerous podcasts, including this one, as well as Exploring the Bizarre with the legendary late Timothy Green Beckley and on Paranormal 60 with David Schrader. His book, SHEPPTON, The Myth, Miracle and Music, was featured on Australia's Mysterious Universe. He contributes to Fate magazine, Normal Paranormal, and Paranormal Underground. He's also the author of Coleridge Hoodoo, Paranormal Tales from Inside the Pit, which came out recently and is the book we talked about the last time he visited with us. And his most recent book is Flying Saucer Esoteric, The Altered States of Ufology, which I just had a chance to look at last night, and it looks absolutely fantastic and a thorough look at the UFO phenomenon. So at any rate, I'm delighted to welcome back to Talking Weird, Maxim W. Furek.
Hi, Dean. Thanks for the invite, and glad to be back on Talking Weird and the Untold Radio Network. So thanks so much for having me.
It's great to have you back. And I got to talk to you last when our audience didn't see you, because I got to interview you for my upcoming documentary, The Man Who Invented Flying Saucers, because you're very knowledgeable about Shaver and Palmer, and you grew up in the same small town, or you're from the same small town Shaver was born in.
Yeah, that was Berwick, Pennsylvania. And
That's right.
I just think it's so amazing that you're putting this documentary together. I think it's just valid. It's worthwhile. It's relevant. So, good luck with that. I'm just glad that I'm playing a small part in it, but I think it's going to be very successful and it's going to be of interest to a lot of people.
Well, thank you. You were fantastic in it, and you appear quite a bit in the current cut, which I'm slowly editing. I still have more to shoot, but let's not talk about me. Let's talk about you. I saw you again and again on Facebook this summer. You were at a bunch of paranormal cons and the like. How were they? Did you have fun doing those?
Yeah, I really did. And this is kind of interesting. I'm a paranormal researcher, but I was invited to 2 Bigfoot expos. And, all the guys I was a guest speaker at both places, but the Bigfoot experts are these people that go into the woods and they look for Bigfoot and they report on that. And I don't do any of that. I mean, I have 2 chapters on Bigfoot in Coleridge and Hoodoo, but, approach this, Bigfoot as well as UFOs as a scientist, as an academic. I think there's a scientific rationale, and I think that us researchers need to either slot these things closer towards the scientific realm or define them, put them in a genre, a category, give them a definition like Jacques Vallée and J. Allen Hynek have, and even John Keel have done. So I think that we all need to do that, and that's what I attempt to do, just to define, to help further define these anomalies that we're reporting on and talking about tonight.
I think that's a worthy cause. Have you ever been invited out, or you ever tempted to go out in your journalism on a Sasquatch hunt, like to go squatching and go out into the woods at night and knock on trees and make whooping sounds and those kind of things? Or
Yeah, I'm planning on going out to Chestnut Ridge. That's the epicenter of Pennsylvania weirdness. There's a 100-mile stretch southeast of Pittsburgh that goes down to West Virginia, and it's Fayette County, Indiana, and Westmoreland County. That's where we see the majority of Bigfoot sightings, as well as Bigfoot and UFOs at the same time, or UAPs. But, Pennsylvania is reportedly number 3 after California and Washington State in Bigfoot sightings. So I don't know how this happens, but, Pennsylvania's, other than Pittsburgh and Allentown and Philadelphia, there's a lot of woods. We're just filled with black, barren woods and anomalies. So Chestnut Ridge is pretty much the epicenter. It's our version of Skinwalker Ranch. So
I'd love to visit there myself one day. Something else you talked about in the book, which I think we're going to concentrate on this evening, because it's such an important part in the paranormal and conspiratorial and ufological narrative, I suppose, or narratives, is the Philadelphia experiment, because we didn't get to talk about it hardly at all last time. And there's a whole chapter on it in Coal Region Hoodoo, which people should check out. First of all, for those of our audience, before we get into the details, who mightn't be familiar with the Philadelphia experiment, can you give just a little bit of an overview?
Yeah, first of all, the first overview is this: that during the war years, there was a lot of experimentation going on. Most of it was clandestine, it was secret. The Manhattan Project, Enrico Fermi, who was in University of Chicago, and underneath the auditorium, he had timbers and plutonium rods, and he was seeing what he could do to assist with the Manhattan Project. We had that. We had the discovery of LSD and mind control experimentations. And then you had something called the Philadelphia experiment, was a legitimate attempt to make American vessels invisible to these German undersea bombs. And with the narrative, the Philadelphia experiment. And by the way, Dean, this is the 80-year anniversary. This took place in 1943, October 28th of 1943.
Oh, wow.
The alleged Philadelphia experiment.
Wow.
But what happened was they were doing a degaussing experiment, and the USS Eldridge, a destroyer escort, was teleported from Philadelphia to Norfolk and back. And during the transition, people died, people were fused into the bulkheads, people went insane. And that's the Philadelphia experiment narrative, the mystique. And then, of course, we have government denial and, I think, cover-up, because the government denies that any of this happened and denies that the technology doesn't exist. But still, there's been books and people stepping forward. And the Philadelphia experiment hasn't gone away after 80 years. It's just gotten bigger and more enhanced, and more people have been stepping forward.
Do you think there was an event that something actually took place?
Yeah, absolutely. There was a thing called degaussing. What they would do is the Germans would go and lay all these bombs, undersea bombs, and as the ships would go over the bomb, the magnetic field would go and trigger the bomb and blow up these Allied shipping. So I think it was in Canada, one of the Allies developed the degaussing technique, and it was a degaussing technique. A gauss is the measure of the magnetism, and so they would wrap coils around these vessels, and sort of electrify them, and that would go and nullify, neutralize the Gauss pull, so they would be degaussed. So that would make the ships invisible to these to the German bombs, and they could go over the bombs without being blown up. I believe what happened was that it was a legitimate experiment that went wrong. It went sideways, and something happened. Now, what happened? Did the ship actually get teleported? A lot of people think that's what happened, but we really don't know, because we haven't had any, cooperation from the military. I have in my book the one military archivist that I contacted said that it was a practical joke, never happened, but still. In my book, I talk about Fred Tracy and Carl Allen and Dr. Jessup and other people that believe that it did. Again, this is the realm of the paranormal. People see things, hear things, believe things, and other people don't. So there it is. That conflict.
I think you interviewed Frederick Tracy, didn't you? Can you tell me how that went? Or
yeah, that was the Philadelphia experiment. I'm a former Vietnam vet. I served aboard the USS Constellation as a radar.
Thank you for your service, Max.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I appreciate that. And I had an affinity to this story. My cousin Jim Furek was friends with Fred Tracy. Jim was in the military and was living in Derry, New Hampshire, and he knew this guy named Fred Tracy that had information about the Philadelphia experiment. So Jim came back down to Pennsylvania and told me this, called up Fred. So I started to talk to Fred. I'd call him up. And then I eventually went up to Derry, New Hampshire to interview him. And we had this wonderful correspondence. But Fred Tracy claimed that he had direct information that the Philadelphia experiment, did actually happen. And he told me about this. He presented that information, and it seemed really documented and valid.
Let's maybe go from there a little bit to where the story kind of starts to enter the public consciousness, and that's really with something that was involved Jessup's famous UFO book, which was MorrisKJessup's book, of course, was called The Case of the UFO, was one of his, I think he wrote 4 or 5 books on the UFO phenomenon.
Right.
But can you talk about how that got drawn into the kind of Philadelphia experiment mystery and how that became part of the legend and in many ways introduced it to the UFO community?
Yeah, so MorrisKJessup was an interesting individual. Never really got his doctorate, but he was noted as a doctor, and that's what they called him, and that's what I call him. But he was an archaeologist. He was one of the first to talk about ancient aliens and that connection, through the biblical connection, to UFOs and ancient astronauts before Eric von Däniken. So Jessup was pretty impressive with his resume. But he wrote this book called The Case for the UFO. So there was a guy named Carl M. Allen, and he had a pseudonym of Carlos Miguel Allende. He was from New Kensington, Pennsylvania, which is out there in the Chestnut Ridge area. That was the epicenter of Pennsylvania weirdness. So that's where Carl Allen was from. But what he did was, in 1955, he sent a copy of The Case for the UFO to the U.S. Office of Naval Research, and it was signed, addressed Happy Easter. So what it was Jessup's book, The Case for the UFO, with all these annotations in different colors. It looked like there were 3 individuals who were discussing Jessup's book. So the military, was concerned because during the war they wanted to, if there was anything happening that might give us the edge or give the enemy the edge, they wanted to know about it. So they called Jessup into their office and they interrogated him, and they wanted to know about this book with the annotations. And here the following year, Jessup started to receive all these handwritten letters from Carl Allen. And Allen claimed that Einstein taught him about the unified force theory, claimed that he was a merchant marine and he had actually seen the Philadelphia experiment. And so he seemed to have some valid information about the experiment and also about Einstein's unified force theory, which was Einstein believed that you could merge gravity and electromagnetism into one component. And if you could do that, that's pretty much what people feel is the holy grail, to be able to have anti-gravity devices for transportation and for teleportations. I mean, this is what everybody has been looking for. This is what Jessup was looking for. That was what his books were all about. So that was the connection with Dr. MorrisKJessup and Carl Allen. It was like a pretty interesting combination, and again, the government became involved in that just because Carl Allen, sent this package to them with the annotations.
And that annotated book that I think somebody got our hands on and reprinted it eventually, and I believe I saw or read a copy back in my PhD dissertation days, but I think it was kind of implied that some of the people communicating might have been extraterrestrial or off-worlders, or are you aware at all of that, or that there was a certain mysteriousness to those three people?
The three people. The one had a name, but the other ones, it seemed like they might have been extraterrestrials having this conversation. In the annotation, it seemed as though Carl Allen had information about Einstein's unified force theory, had some inside information about Jessup's book, and that's what drew the attention of the government. So again, he was one of the people that sort of talked about this. And then with the Philadelphia experiment, the book by William Moore and Charles Berlitz, there was so much documentation there about Carl Allen and the connection with MorrisKJessup. So he sort of became infamous, in this Philadelphia experiment narrative.
It's just a question that occurred to me now, because we're talking about the Berlitz and Moore book then, or you mentioned it. And Moore, of course, as we were discussing before the show, is well known to, whether at that stage of his career or not, certainly later in his career, was an asset to the AFOSI, the Air Force's security agency, and had confessed at the MUFON Symposium in 1989, which incidentally you talk about in your wonderful new book as well, Flying Saucer Esoteric. And he told the UFO community at that MUFON Symposium that he'd been feeding disinformation to them via his handler, Rick Doty, and that they'd been spying on the UFO community and doing all these kind of other things. Do you ever think there might be any disinfo around the mythology of the Philadelphia experiment, intentionally put out there, or if not put out there initially, then spun later by people in intelligence services, be them military or civilian?
Yeah, because I think that's exactly how it works. You take something that's controversial and you put the misinformation out there. So, people will talk about it, discuss it, and maybe think that this is just the realm of lunatics, of crazy people, that it has no, actual bearing. And I think it's so easy to get the disinformation out there. I'm sure that the government has assets, and as you said, William Moore and Richard Doty were part of that. They were complicit. So, they did, I think, a lot of harm to the paranormal and UFO community. And, that was sad to hear that, when they had those revelations. And I was always wondered why. I mean, was it because Charles Moore got caught in something, maybe a lie, a misrepresentation, and maybe just use this, that he was a government operative just as a cover. I think there's more to the story, but
it's an interesting question as to why he decided to come forward and blow that whistle. at the MUFON symposium in
Yeah.
'89. Back to the Philadelphia experiment, though. Was there talk about that type of technology, those type of experiments being continued post World War II, or?
Well, what happened was, when you talk about the Philadelphia experiment, you're talking about uh, teleportation, time travel, mind control, things like that. And what happened was the Philadelphia experiment morphed into another project. And the Philadelphia experiment was Project Rainbow, Project Invisibility. There were a number of projects before they actually had the Philadelphia experiment. But then after that, it's believed, and Al Bielak was one of them that talked about this extensively. But Bielak claimed that the Philadelphia experiment then went to Montauk, New York. I think it was Camp Hero, where Montauk allegedly is a epicenter of government experiments, including time travel and mind control. The series Stranger Things is based on Montauk. That's all about that. So again, it sort of makes sense because we know that the CIA was involved in LSD experimentations and mind control experiments. I think there was one called Operation Midnight, where they gave individuals LSD, individuals that were going to see prostitutes. So that was, they were watching this. There was scientists that thought they were going insane because they were given LSD and didn't know about it. And with hallucinogens like LSD, what's important is the set and the setting. I mean, if you're in a proper environment, then that would be conducive to a good, safe, pleasurable LSD experiment. You take the pill, it kicks in. You have like maybe 5-6 hours of this blissful, altered reality, this altered perception. But if you don't have the proper set or setting, for example, if you just take this pill and you don't know, if somebody just doses you, and all of a sudden you start to hallucinate and everything, I mean, you feel like you're going insane. And the CIA did things like that clandestinely just to see what the response would be. So to say that the government had a certain place where they conducted mind control experiments, makes sense. Just like, we talk about Roswell being the repository for, crash saucers and extraterrestrials. It makes sense that a place like Montauk was an epicenter for mind control experimentation. So, and again, a lot of that we heard about for the first time from Al Bielak, who, and Al died in, 2011, but Al Bielak was the one that continued this Philadelphia experiment narrative. And Al claimed that he was an engineer. 1943, he was aboard the Eldridge, and Al Bielak claimed that he was the one that actually pulled the switch, that caused all the commotion. Bad things happened, and he tried to shut it down. Everything froze, and Bielak and his brother jumped out of the ship and were teleported. I've seen two accounts. I've listened to a lot of Al Bielak's, narratives. He's on YouTube all over the place, and he's very, very good. I mean, he's well spoken. He has good recall for details. He's convincing. He's probably the best advocate for the Philadelphia experiment. I mean, like, he is really very believable when you listen to him. I mean, no matter what it is, but his stories got pretty bizarre, but his narrative did. But again, seems to be very believable. And and him and his buddy Phil Schneider, got a lot of attention in the '90s. Again, both of them having a connection to the Philadelphia experiment.
Yeah, we did a Mysterious Library, Jason McLean and I, a couple of months ago, maybe 3 months ago now, on a documentary called The Underground that looks at Phil Schneider and Phil Schneider's mysterious and very horrific passing. But I remember back in the '90s when I first became kind of reinterested in the UFO phenomenon. That these type of talk was all over the place. The Phil Schneider story about underground bases and government, deals with aliens and fighting aliens, and the Bielek story was everywhere. Art Bell was carrying this kind of
Yeah,
stuff, and you
yeah.
couldn't open a UFO magazine and not read about it. So, talk a little more, if you could, about the Phil Schneider and Al Bielek connection.
Well, it's interesting because they're connected just as Carl Allen and Dr. Jessup are. It's just amazing, that dichotomy, I guess you would say, or that synergy or symbiosis or whatever it is. But I mean, they are connected. There was a conference in, I think, 1995. It was a preparatory conference, and it was all these patriots. These people believe that there's a deep state and the government wants to control us, and so it was all about that. But Al Bielek and Phil Schneider appeared there. They both had a strong connection to the Eldridge and the Philadelphia experiment. Like I said, Al Bielek claimed that he was the engineer that actually pulled the switch on the Eldridge to start the experiment. Phil Schneider claimed that his father was a former German U-boat commander. And it might have been Project Paperclip, where the United States went after these German scientists and engineers and brought them over here to work for us. A lot of examples of that. Phil Schneider claimed that his father, Otto, was assigned to the Eldridge. So he was there in 1943 during this Philadelphia experiment. Of course, Phil Schneider's story, he claimed also that Phil Schneider was an engineer. He was an explosives engineer, and he was working in the DOSE DUMB. They were DUMB. That was the military acronym for Deep Underground Military Base.
Mm-hmm.
And he was there. And what was happening? They were drilling down something like maybe 2 miles. And keep in mind that the core of the Earth is something like 200 miles. We've only gone down as far as 7. I think in Russia they were drilling down, but they had to stop because the drills would just melt. I mean, just because of the heat, intensity, and everything, you just can't go down that far. But with Phil Schneider, they're drilling down, and the drill bits kept on breaking. So they thought they would go down and see what was causing the drills to break. And you know the story, but he went down there with Green Berets and Black Berets. They were all armed, and Schneider said, "There's something going on here. Something really, strange. That that you would have all these armed military people." But they got to the bottom, and Schneider saw 2 or 3 humanoids. They were 4 foot tall, and there was one that was 7 foot tall that shot him with a laser. Now, Phil Schneider had 2 or 3 fingers missing. And when he would go around to these conferences, he would go and show his missing fingers, talking about the 7-foot gray. He was able to kill 2 of these creatures. He had a pistol, killed 2 of them, and then the 7-foot gray shot him, and one of the Green Berets or Black Berets drug him out and saved his life. So that was Phil Schneider. No, Phil Schneider was found dead. It looked like it was a military-style execution. It looked like there was a catheter, a rubber catheter around his neck. And that was, interesting, the number of people that died mysteriously, suicides. Dr. Jessup was one of them. He was found, he was going to make an announcement to his friend Dr. Valentine about the Philadelphia experiment and about Einstein's unified field of theory. And the next day, they found him in a parking lot in Miami, dead. It looked like he had committed suicide, with the carbon monoxide. Another one was Admiral Forrestal, and he plays a part in this as well with the Fred Tracy narrative. But Dr. Jessup, Admiral Forrestal, and Phil Schneider, all mysterious deaths. And, it sort of just makes you wonder, 1 or 2, but here's 3. And there were others too. There were others, friends of Phil Schneider, that died mysteriously. And he felt that he told people whenever he did his conferences, he said, if I'm found dead, just know that it wasn't a suicide. So he just was warning people before then. So he sort of had some, I don't know, he's like precognitive abilities, to foresee his death. But
No, I was just saying, I think he was warning too beforehand that some of his friends who knew about these things had also supposedly been suicided, so to speak, had been murdered, and their deaths had been presented as suicides. So it is certainly interesting that he was talking about this in the lead up to his death, and then something similar happened to him. So that does make one raise their eyebrows even more, I think, about Schneider's death.
yeah. And also just, with the DUMBs, the deep underground military bases, I mean, we know that there are bases, underground bases. They had those during the Cold War, in the 50s and 60s, and they're all over the place, places for the government to go just in case there's a crisis, whatever, a nuclear holocaust, a war. So there's places for them to go to continue governing. So, Schneider's story was interesting. He talked about the Dulce Wars. He said that we actually went to war with the aliens. He said that, and this is interesting. It's sort of like it parallels the Roswell narrative. But he claims that there was an agreement that the aliens would give us technology if we would keep them there, keep them safe. And then part of the agreement was that the aliens would be allowed to take, certain cattle, animals, and also humans, but also returning the humans. And this also went wrong, and so that supposedly triggered the Dulce Wars between, the humans and the aliens. So Phil Schneider was one who talked extensively about that, and then there's been books about it. But that's another sort of like offshoot from where the Philadelphia experiment was. It's almost like a tree, like another branch.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Of course, a lot of Schneider's narrative as well as an extension of the Paul Benowitz material, his Project Beta material, and his suspicion that there was something underneath the Dulce Mesa and that these type of, government alien cross-pollination things were happening. So it's interesting to see how that story bloomed. And you're right, it's fascinating that there is a connection with the Philadelphia experiment. I haven't read all of your new book yet, and I'm not sure if you're aware or not, but speaking of Schneider, there's his father's connection, Otto Schneider's connection, supposedly with Valiant Thor as well, the visiting type Venusian spaceman, or the attractive space brother who is meant to be a liaison at the Pentagon. And there's supposedly a photo of what's meant to be Valiant Thor at some type of meeting with scientists and military types. And Otto Schneider's meant to be in that photograph as well, or at least that's what's presented
Yeah,
in
interesting. Yeah.
which is presented in that documentary, The Underground, I was talking about. And I believe Phil Schneider used to present that photo when he did his presentations. You know what is weird though, speaking about disinfo, which we were, is that at these type of early preparedness or survivalist or patriot or whatever they were kind of conferences, it's kind of weird that you would put a Phil Schneider and an Al Bielek into that mix. You almost have to wonder if that isn't some kind of disinfo
Yeah.
being thrown into an otherwise political movement to, I don't know, whether to test something or to mix something up, or it just seems weird that you would have that where there is this weird combination that happened in the 90s, I think, maybe in some ways more than now, maybe not, where you got this weird coalescing between ufology and conspiracy theory. Another classic example is Jeff Cooper, or William Cooper, of course. William Cooper, who wrote Behold a Pale Horse and was probably one of the most significant UFO writers in the 80s into the 90s, was this person who kind of trod this ground between the various, militia, patriot, survivalist movements and the UFO movement as well. There were these weird cross-pollinations. Jim Keith is another example. He died mysteriously at Burning Man after falling from the stage and having a minor surgery on his leg and dying on the operating table. He was another one of these people that was writing about, UFOs and black helicopters and deep underground military bases all in the same book. So there was this very strange, weird cross-pollination between more traditional conspiracy theory on the right and UFO belief and weird paranormal things. What have you got any take on that? What might have been happening?
Well, I think you're right, but I think that the connection with both Schneider and Bielak to these conventions, with a lot of extreme right wingers, with right wing philosophies. But the connection with the two of them was that they believed in this new world, that there was a new world order that wanted to control us and contain us and keep the population at, I think, what did he say? Like Belak said, maybe at 500 million. But he had some really, strange and interesting things to say. But again, when you talk about Belak, I mean, what a great communicator. He could articulate. I mean, you listen to his prose, you listen to him and I've listened to so many of these, but they both believed that there was a deep state that wanted to take over and control us, and and they were warning about that. And they thought that they were also being investigated and watched, and so there was a little bit of that paranoia, with both of them.
You talk a little bit, I think it gets a mention too I know it does in Flying Saucer Esoteric. I think it's also in, maybe it's mentioned in Coleridge and Hoodoo, but that's the cinematic or the movie adaptation of the Philadelphia Experiment with Michael Paré in
Yeah.
the 1980s. How accurate is that to the real story? Or is it just uses the real story as a jumping off point, or is there some accuracy in that
Yeah.
tale? Or
Yeah, well, there's some accuracy, but they use the actual Philadelphia Experiment as a jumping off place, and then it becomes more sci-fi than anything else. But the interesting thing about this, and that was released in what, 19, I think 84.
something like that?
Yeah, and
Mid-80s, yeah.
Belak saw it in 1985, and Belak said that when he saw it, it sort of triggered repressed memories. And then he realized that he was part of the Philadelphia Experiment. So that's when he came forward and talked about this.
Fascinating.
He talked about being on the Philadelphia Experiment. He talked about Montauk being a project director there. But then he also talked about being time travel to the future. And he talked about what things would be like in the future with floating cities and these, extremely, good-looking intellectual people that controlled these societies. It was almost like an anti-socialism narrative that Belak had. But again, he's on YouTube. I mean, any one of your listeners could go and Google him and see what he has to say. But again, very insightful, very good recall, and Al Belak, seems to have continued the Philadelphia Experiment, continued that narrative, and taken it into another place.
Yeah, it's still kind of, I don't think it is talked about as much as it was. Then again, I remember it being talked about a lot, obviously, in the 80s and in the 90s, and probably before that, before I can remember. But it's not something which pops up as much as perhaps it should. It certainly remains a really interesting story. Now, I'm trying to think. It is something you cover in your new book as well, right? Flying Saucer Esoteric. I went through it briefly because I only had it for a day, but you talk about it in that. So you obviously think it's a pretty significant, I guess, part of the UFO story, or it's a significant aside to it, or where do you place it in the history of ufology, the Philadelphia Experiment?
Well, yeah, it's part of it. I think ufology is this wonderful tapestry of contactees, abductees, hoaxers, scientists, planetary explorers. I mean, just the whole mishmash. I mean, even Adamski fits into that narrative, as well as J. Allen Hynek and Jacques Vallée and all those people. So we look at the information, we try to make sense of it, and go from there. But the Philadelphia Experiment fits in with the World War II secret experiments. It fits in with the anti-gravity devices, or the quest, the holy grail for those anti-gravity devices, which may be the means of propulsion for UFOs and these UAPs. So, that's one thing that, so many people would like to figure out and, and see. But yeah, the Philadelphia Experiment, I think, falls into the realm of ufology. I think as a maybe its own unique category, but it certainly fits.
Now, speaking about ufology, we're not going to talk too much about your book now, although we've still got a little while, so we can chat a little bit about it because I'd like to read it fully before we talk
Yeah,
about it. But that's the cover for your new book for those who are watching.
yeah.
It's called Flying Saucer Esoteric: The Altered States of Ufology. Again, I only had it for less than a day. I had a chance to go through it quickly. It seemed very thorough. It seemed just to be comprehensive, and its look at UFO history and the impact of some of these ideas. When you were researching the book, just out of interest, what were the things were there some themes that really stood out to you, or there were some things that really popped out to you when you were doing all that research? Because I know you spent a considerable time just working on this book and doing nothing else.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, I was driven. I was really compulsed to finish this. And I worked on it morning, noon, and night. And I had a goal, and I was going to finish this. But I was consumed with flying saucers. I read every single book I could. I looked at all these documentaries and narratives and talked to people. So I really immersed myself in this, and I use the word flying saucer, in this flying saucer narrative. But what came across was that these sightings have always been with us. I mean, when you open up my book to 1947 and look at Kenneth Arnold or look at Roswell, I mean, look at what happened before and look at what happened after. We've always seen these saucers. They've always been with us, whether it's in days before Christ, the BC, and that's where I start. I look at some of the folks like the theologians and scientists who lived before Christ, people that believed that there was life on other planets. Now, this is interesting because for them to even say that, they were going against the dogma. They were going against the dictates of church and state. And some of these folks were viewed as heretics, for putting Earth at the center and believing that there was life on other planets and all this. So, we do that. And then I also have some biblical scriptures, and I use that specifically just to bounce off people like Eric von Daniken and even MorrisKJessup, people that believe that the Bible, taken literally, represents, space brothers that came down and procreated and created, maybe a master race or a super race. All of that. So whether it's Ezekiel's wheel or Lot's wife turning into a pillar of salt, I use the biblical scriptures, just to point out what I call them biblical hijackers, but people like Eric von Daniken used as his proof. And then we go on through all the decades. But what's interesting is that there have always been people seeing these things, and we have always tried to find out what they were. And I'll tell you something that's, Dean, I found of interest. A couple of weeks ago, I was just decided to watch an old 1950s black and white sci-fi thing. And so I looked at Earth versus the flying saucers.
Based on the Kehoe book, although Kehoe was horrified by it, apparently.
Right, around 1956, I believe. But at the beginning of this black and white, movie, which is great. There's a scientist there, and I think they use the scientist to give the movie maybe a little bit of authenticity. But he was claiming that out of all the things that we see, there's 3% that can't be identified. Now, flash forward to 2020, 2017, 2019, the Pentagon is saying the same thing. Huh. We see things out there, and 3% of them we can identify. They're either ours, or they belong to Iran, China, or Russia, or they're extraterrestrial. Again, we don't know. Take your pick. So, again, it's interesting, though, that the Pentagon is reflecting what was in the Earth versus the flying saucers in '56. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
It is in some ways the more we know, the less we know, or the further we go along in the path of ufology, we go back to the start again. And it is interesting, this whole push for UFO disclosure and the idea that the government knows the secrets. This is what Donald Kehoe thought and Frank Scully thought back when they were writing articles for major magazines and then some of the first best-selling UFO books in the early 1950s. I think it's now. I don't know if the government know the secrets or not. Personally, I don't think that they know it. Unless it's their own technology, then they know. But I don't think they know the UFO secrets. If there is something more, perhaps paranormal to it, as I often suggest on this show. But it's interesting that we live in a culture where there's an assumption if there is a secret like UFOs, if there is a mysterious phenomenon haunting our skies, that the government must know the solutions. So it's weird. In one way, we're distrustful of the government and we're paranoid of the government and all these other things. Certainly the UFO community is, maybe rightfully so. But then at the same time, they expect that the government are going to give them the secrets. And this has always been the case since the 50s. It fascinates me that, there's still this assumption the government knows they're going to tell us. That's one thing that really hasn't changed. As much as the narratives have changed, and we talked about Schneider and the idea of it becoming more nefarious and their underground wars and aliens abducting people with the US government knowing and these weird conspiracies, that didn't exist in 1950. But the idea that flying saucers are extraterrestrial and the government knows has been with us now for 70 years. It seems like ufology hasn't made any progress in that capacity at all.
And the other thing, I'm really sort of disappointed in the government, and we had a wonderful opportunity in 2023 with those congressional hearings to get the truth out. Now, David Grush, the former, military guy, claimed that he knew where the crash saucers are. He claimed he knows where the bodies are, and he would only give these to the appropriate government agencies. Well, come on, let's go and fess up and, show your cards. I mean, it's time, don't dance around this thing, show the cards and, let us know where all this is. He also said that during the war that in Italy that there was a crash saucer that was turned over to the Vatican, and then in the 30s, and then we retrieved it. So again, where's the information? Where's the documentation? Same thing with what happened in Mexico with Jaime Maussan, I believe, who had the alien creatures. Again, you use the scientific method. If you do have something there, let the scientific community take a look at that and examine those bodies and determine what they are. Because Jaime's been known to pull a hoax or two during his career. So again, that's what we need. We need the scientific method, and Congress needed to pursue this further. It was a good opening. Everybody watched that. I mean, I couldn't, I was really, amazed at what was happening. But again, we came so close, and that's all. We just came to the edge. We didn't have any conclusion. So, everybody, we're still holding our breaths, waiting for, is there more, or is, Peggy Lee, is that all there is? There has to be more. I mean, this is just like, it's disrespectful to the scientific community. So I think the government needed to push a little bit harder, and they didn't. So I'm glad they had the hearings, but I'm personally looking for more.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm suspicious, as regular viewers and listeners to Talking Weird and Mysterious Library, and whenever I pop up on anybody else's podcast, are probably aware. I find it difficult to believe that most of what has been released, even by people like Grush, for example, even through things like the leaked footage of the Tic Tac video, which to the Stars Academy leaked initially, and then the New York Times ran the story, of course, and talked about the Pentagon's secret program, or secret UFO program. I have real hard time not thinking that all of that is intentionally leaked. The fact that the whistleblower helped draft the legislation, David Grush, he helped draft the legislation, helped with the language that let him be the whistleblower, to me seems to indicate that there's something very coordinated about all of this. The fact that Leslie Keane is one of the journalists.
Yeah, you're right. And there are times, how did she get that scoop, that tip?
Well, both times she's the one who scoops when she does the New York Times article with who's the co-writer? I forget now. Anyway, whatever. And they also are the journalists who do the debrief scoop initially about the whistleblower as well. So it seems almost like the information, and I don't know, maybe they're writing it with all good intention, but it seems like there are specific players involved, and that the information is being released very specifically, and that people at the front and center of the UFO disclosure movement, like George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell, who also just happened to win front and row seats behind the witnesses at the hearings, right? I mean, that wasn't accidental. I'm assuming those seats are pretty hard to come by. Like somebody in the witness stand gave them those seats, because I think that's reserved mainly for the witnesses, or somebody in the Congress let them sit there. That we're starting to have this narrative be intentionally pushed forward. And over the course of the last several years, we've seen it on everything from Tucker Carlson when he was still on Fox, through CNN, to the New York Times, to every little podcast in this space that there is. All of a sudden, this narrative that there is something non-human, and they're very careful with some of their choice of language as well, that it is non-human, although to most people that just means extraterrestrial. But that isn't always what the Keens and the Grushes are saying. They're quite careful with some of the ways. And Tom DeLonge, the at least the poster child to the Stars Academy, of maybe he's the founder. I mean, you can believe what you want there. Yeah. But he says a similar thing, that these things aren't extraterrestrial. They're non-human intelligences from somewhere else. But it seems to be that there's a very, to me at least, an intentional push of this information. Do you ever get that sense that this information is being intentionally pushed, or do you think there are just whistleblowers who are managing to get it out there?
No, I think it's the government. There's like you said, a very elaborate, coordinated attempt by the government to for disinformation. I mean, it works. They've always done that. There's nothing new. It's happening again. So. We'll wait and see what happens. But like I said, there needs to be more information. I mean, they like I said, not to be redundant, but I think that those whistleblowers need to show their cards. If you have information, come forward and show it to us.
Yeah, while I suspect it's a controlled release, I'm still not sure of the reason why. I can't tell. I'm not some kind of prophet, and I don't try to theorize. But to me, it does smell like a controlled release. What's your thoughts on things like To the Stars Academy, for example, now, although it's less front and center than it was perhaps a few years ago, and things like NICAP, Kehoe's group back in the 60s? These organizations always seem to have their board of directors and their senior folks ex-military and or civilian intelligence. It's weird that the civilian groups as stacked with people from the intelligence and to the intelligent wings of both civilian and military intelligence services. To me, that seems suspicious.
Yeah. I don't know if they're recruiting them or these former intelligence operatives are seeking out these groups. It may be a combination of both. One thing we didn't discuss with Fred Tracy, my contact from Darien, New Hampshire.
Oh yeah.
He claimed that when he was aboard the USS Antietam, another aircraft carrier, that similar experiments like the Philadelphia experiment happened on the Antietam, and that the crew members had some negative effects and physical effects of the degaussing technique. But he also said something interesting. It was Admiral James Forrestal. Supposedly, there was a document that was drafted by Forrestal that admitted that the Philadelphia experiment actually happened, and this was read to the guys on the Antietam before the end of the war. So Fred Tracy talked about this extensively. I put this in my book, Coleridge and Hoodoo. But Admiral Forrestal is an interesting individual. First of all, he has been implicated with MJ-12. He was supposed to have been one of the members of MJ-12. And the other thing was that he was the one who committed suicide. This was 1949, jumping 16 floors. Now, if in fact Admiral Forrestal was admitted to the Bethesda Medical Hospital for treatment for depression, and if he was on a suicidal watch, then why did they put him up on the 16th floor? I mean, it would make more sense to keep him in a more secure place, maybe on the first floor. So, some of this just, doesn't make sense. It's either gross negligence and incompetence, or it's something else. So again, we're looking for the something else. But again, Forrestal, like Jessup, like Phil Schneider, they all died mysterious deaths, and it sort of makes you wonder, if there was something else going on there.
Yeah, I'm not somebody who talks a lot about conspiracy theory or travels down that route very often on this show, but certainly the James Forrestal suicide and or murder or whatever it was, when he was jumped or pushed out of the window, it seems very suspicious. It seems like you don't get somebody in that senior position, just getting that unwell and then just leaping to their death. And that leads credence to the people who want to say he was part of MJ-12. That leads credence to the people who say he wanted to blow the whistle on the UFO secret, or he was horrified with what was happening, you know. So who knows what really happened with Forrestal? Maybe it was just a suicide, but it seems suspicious whenever there are people that you can link to these stories. So again, you were talking about Jessup, certainly. Although Cooper, in fairness, there were a number of warrants due out on him, so he was shot to death. But Schneider would be another example. Jim Keith's a classic example. Danny Casolaro is another classic example, the journalist who was investigating what he called the octopus, this kind of massive conspiracy web. There are people who've died in very mysterious circumstances, often supposedly having suicided, where it seemed, or having committed suicide, where it seems they were suicided or otherwise murdered. And for whatever reason, that doesn't necessarily to me make me think that ETs are real, or there even is a ridiculously large conspiracy. It just might be that these people push somebody's buttons the wrong way and they said a little bit of the truth. The Schneider story, for example, mightn't be because there was really an alien base at Dulce. Now I'm just, shooting theories out. It might be because his father really was a part of Operation Paperclip, and he was talking about things his father had done, which he shouldn't have been talking about. And they were like, we've got to shut this guy up,
Yeah.
Who knows? Or it could be that he was used for disinformation spreading, and then they were like, okay, how can we put a period to this story? We know, we'll kill him suspiciously. That'll make the conspiracy people talk forever. So I mean, I don't know. It's all very strange.
Well, I'm hoping that your listeners will pick up a copy of Coleridge and Hoodoo, Paranormal Tales from Inside the Pit, and read about the Philadelphia experiment. I think it's important. It's the 80-year anniversary, and it's just a fascinating account. There's been 3 motion pictures and 1 documentary, about the Philadelphia experiment, books, etc. So, I think there's something there. But what it is, it's just like hidden under a whole lot of layers of, government denial and maybe disinformation as well. So
No, they should definitely get a copy of that book. I really enjoyed Coleridge and Hoodoo. I loved how, as I mentioned last time you were on, I've told other people as well, I love how while it's regionally specific to Pennsylvania, you still put it in a broader context. All of these stories get put in a broader context. And while there are a number of books about the paranormal written almost like regional travel guides for people who are interested in the strange and weird, this is one of the few books that I found that putting all the stories in a broader historical and cultural perspective. And of course, your very brand new book, which I haven't had a chance to properly read yet, is Flying Saucer Esoteric, the altered states of ufology. And people can how do people get both of those books?
Well, they could go and check out my website. It's www.MaximWFurek.com. That's MaximFurek.com. And if they want an autographed, signed copy, or they could get them from Amazon.com.
Yeah, people should definitely go out and do that. I'm sure Flying Saucer Esoteric is going to be a great seller for you. I know Coleridge and Hoodoo did very well. It was really selling well, I remember.
Yeah, really. Yeah, we're really pleased with both. And Beyond the Fray is excited about esoteric. They think that's the timing's right. And again, there's more to the story. And but I'm really pleased with the book. I think it flows well. It's comprehensive. It captures a lot of the stuff that needs to be in there. Again, that beautiful tapestry of ufology. I mean, that's how I view it. So.
Well, I can't wait to read it thoroughly and to talk to you more extensively about it, hopefully in a show on this network somewhere in the not too distant future. You were a great guest as always, Max, always fascinating and just full of just intriguing, weird and wonderful stories. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. I appreciate it. And you've been a good friend, and I love your program, and continued success with Talking Weird.
Thank you so much. And until I talk to you again, Max, and to talk to everybody else out there, keep it weird.